the Eagles still don't have a coordinator. They still don't have a wide receiver coach. They still don't have a defensive back coach. So the Eagles interviewed Jason Garrett.
Waterboy?
How quick would Eagles fans though?
Oh man,
how quick would they? You know how Eagles fans? Oh well, this makes sense. He's a good coach. He was just a bad head coach. Oh, he'll be good. He's a veteran president.
No, it would be.
I wouldn't let them.
It would happen.
Stay on later. Just keep.
It would happen. Remember, DeMarco Murray was going to come here and be great. People were right. I had joked earlier about because Teron Davenport tweeted something about the John Robinson regime in Tennessee and how it all started with a great, huge trade. And I said, was it the one where he got rid of Dorial Green Beckham for Dennis Kelly, right? But people thought Dorian Green Beckham was going to come here and be like some amazing player. And I remember doing radio at the time, and I was kind of on an island saying this is not going to work out well for the Eagles. And people wanted to fight me.
Well, think about Dorial Green Beckham. You know, for his time, Harold Carmichael was built like Dorial Green Beckham. I mean, he was one of a kind for that era. So we'll start there with John McMullen as the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the Centennial class going in. And, John, it finally includes Harold Carmichael, who we've been hearing his name for years, that he deserves to be in. He finally got the call this morning, and he's going in. What I find interesting is we complain about guys all the time when we look at their numbers. Carmichael led the league in catches with 67 catches in 1973. Can you imagine a receiver with 67 catches? We'd say, get him off the team. He's not good enough.
Yeah, real quick, before we get to that, there's only two things I want this offseason. And one is Jason Garrett to be the offensive coordinator. And the other is for the Eagles to sign Jadeveon Clowney in free agency. Because I want to see the hypocrisy meter just go off. Because people will love both of those moves.
That's what I'm saying. They would rationalize it.
Oh, my God, yeah. Clowney, guy's a beast. They would love it.
Right. The Garrett one, though, I don't know that they would embrace that one as much. Garrett, Clowney, I agree with you.
Steph is right. They'd clap. They'd start clapping their hands just like Jason Garrett. He's a veteran guy. He's been around.
This is what Carson needs. Yeah, he's like the Frank Reich.
Well, he listened to Jerry Jones for all those years. Maybe he'll listen to Doug.
So those are the two things. With Harold, I've said this for years, and and I just tweeted it out. Don't start your conversations with statistics. It's a completely different game. You judge players in the era they were in, and that's why that's why they're doing this Centennial class, because when Harold left here, which was 83, I guess, somewhere in that range. So we're talking about 35, 37 years total. 67 receptions. But he led an entire decade, 63 to 72, 73 to 83, excuse me. He had more receptions, more yards, more touchdowns than any receiver in the NFL. That's how you judge players. When you dominate your era, and the problem is it gets lost, because then you have the Jimmy Smiths of the world who are putting up these numbers. Well, Jimmy Smith is great. He's not a Hall of Fame player. If you catch 67 receptions today, like you said, Mike, and you're a number one or a number two receiver, and you play 16 games, you're a failure. Then you're leading the league. It's a completely different game, and he dominated in his era. And I think he was hurt more than anything else early by wasn't on a lot of good teams. And then later, let's be honest, people start dying off. They forget. You have newer people who don't understand the history of the game, and they just look at the numbers and say, he's not a Hall of Fame receiver. That's what happens.
Yeah, and the uniqueness of him, too, like 6'8", he started out as a tight end. He was drafted in the 7th round. He went to a virtually unknown school. I mean, he got a really cool story, too, on the fact that when you talk about a Hall of Famer, he has a great story to tell. Yeah,
I mean, you don't even see 6'8" receivers today. I mean, the catching, you see a lot of 6'4", 6'5", but what he was as an outside receiver, and again, you talk about it. I know there's, the big talk this time was Harold Carmichael versus Drew Pearson, Hall of Fame. And he deserves to be in as well. So it shouldn't be one or the other nature of it. If you go back to Lynn Swann, look at that, and they look at that today, and they look at his numbers and say he's not a Hall of Fame receiver. I don't know why people can't grasp it. I really don't. It's one of those, I mean, you're just avoiding history if you try not to understand the context there.
Speaking of that, John, I'm just curious, and you may have talked about it already with Mike recently and Ryan, but Jimmy Johnson in the Hall of Fame, I thought was a little questionable as a coach because the longevity to me just wasn't there. I mean, he could have been one of the greats for a long time. Unfortunately, Jerry Jones' ego got in the way. He went to Miami. He had some okay years, but I was a little surprised by him compared to some others because I just felt like that opened it up to the Hall of very good. I mean, listen, I know he won 2 Super Bowls, and that does it for a lot of coaches, but it was such a short time frame. I had a little bit of trepidation about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's tough. I mean,
like, does Dick Vermeil belong in over Jimmy Johnson?
I don't know if Dick belongs in either, to be honest. But I'm like you. I'm like, it's Hall of Fame. It's not Hall of Very Good. I think all 3 of those guys, Bill Cowher as well, I think you can argue either way. Really good coach, but is he really a Hall of Fame coach? I don't know. Like, Andy Reid doesn't have a Super Bowl yet. He's a better coach than all 3. Mm-hmm. I think he's a Hall of Famer even if he doesn't win.
Now, so somebody said, John, real quick, not to cut you off, but somebody had mentioned, and I don't know if this is accurate, but that Cowher and Johnson are both also considered for their broadcasting work. Is that true?
Not that I know of.
No, then they would be in as contributors, right? But they're not. Okay. They were voted in as coaches.
They were voted in as coaches. Yeah. I thought that was inaccurate. That's why I was a little. I was like, I don't think that's taken under account when you are.
Here was my problem, and I tweeted that at the time. If Dick Vermeil had a studio show, would he be in? You know, because they did those live, and everyone.
He was for a little while, wasn't he? A color analyst for a little while.
But he's not now.
Yeah.
And the point is, you saw David Baker surprise Bill Cowher on the air and surprise Jimmy Johnson on the air. Now, it's a bit of cynicism here, but I've been around too long. Did that TV aspect have something to do with it? Because everybody was saying, what? It was. Yeah. But, I mean, like I say every week, and that's the reason they were chosen over Dick Vermeil. I'm not saying that happened, but I think there's at least that question's got to be asked.
Yeah. Well, and there was, and again, we're not taking away from some of these guys, but if they're not having this old class, John, are some of these guys making it?
No. Well, that's the reason they did it. I mean, it's an expanded.
So, in other words, are you a Hall of Famer, or were you only a gimmicky Hall of Famer because we needed to do something special for the 100th year?
Well, there's always people that get lost in the mix because of the reason I said. I mean, a large portion, and even further, there are guys on that list that even I don't know, to be honest. And
you didn't cover Bobby Dillon?
No. And they get lost in the shuffle. And once you when you're a modern era candidate and you don't make it and you sort of get pushed and you go into the senior class, there's a lot of guys. There's still a ton of guys. There are some guys you think that every once in a while they pop up. I thought Donnie Shell was in the Hall of Fame. I missed it. Is he not in the Hall of Fame? I mean, they're still guys. I often like Jim Marshall. I always he's not Fame. I'm amazed by that. There are certain guys who get overlooked for whatever reason. And you do want to right those wrongs because, as I said, the younger voters come in and they don't understand what they meant to the game. So I don't have any problem rewriting some of those wrongs, and I hope it happens. I think my biggest question is what I just brought up was with the coaches. Because of how it went down, because of the TV aspect, because of Dave went up on both pregame shows, I got a little question about that. Not to mention, I think they're borderline candidates.
I saw go cover it, and I remember him Obviously, with was the '86 Bears, but he played at Pitt. Bill Fralick and him at Pitt, and I remember having the football card of Jimbo Covert, with Covert, the big Jerry curl, and just had this big mop head. I remember as a kid, I used to collect the football cards, and if he had All Pro or whatever written on there, this guy's got to be great. And then through his grill, him and Fralick, the two Pitt guys, I was always turned off by them because obviously down the road, I was like, yeah, the heck with the Pitt guys. But he's a guy actually that I think we're going to have on at Radio Row this year.
Yeah, I mean, he was a great player for a long time, and he's more modern, so some people will at least remember him as you did, just at least a little bit. Some of the other guys were obviously from a different. I just had somebody on talking about Pete. He's been in since 1970. So a lot of times you forget who's in, who's out. Yeah. I forgot Donnie Shell. And there are just great players, and it should be very, very difficult to get in. It is very difficult to get in when you compare how many people played this game to how many people are in the Hall of Fame. It makes that honor so special. But Harold's a guy who should have been in long before this, and he got lost in the shuffle. And because the game has changed, and because people look at numbers on a black and white piece of paper and don't look at the era he was in, don't look at how he dominated that era, don't look at how he put up those numbers in that era with a lot of quarterbacks. Bill Jaws got here for the most part. Should have been in a long time ago.
Well, I want to ask you about Tagliabue and what he did, because obviously now when we look at the commissioner, he's not a very popular figure. Making money for the owners. He's in it to make money for the owners. That's his job, to make owners money.
He is.
Right, but was that the way Tagliabue was viewed?
No, well, he's viewed differently now. I think it's unfair. And a lot of it is because of the concussion. He gets blamed for that, revisionist history. And the old joke, his first he actually did, Dr. Elliott. He had no background in neurosurgery, neuroscience, that. So he knew as much as we do as far as the scientific aspect of it. Nobody knew about consent. Nobody understood what was going on. Sit there and use him and said, done this, Paul should have done that. It's completely unfair, and people still.
John, though, in fairness, that there was that lawsuit also involved where there was evidence, the medical information they were getting at the time was intentionally withheld.
Oh, there's no question, but I think that was more of anyone who watched North Dallas 40 back in the day, which is a great movie. If you don't know it, you should watch it because it's entertaining. I mean, it was the Wild Wild West.
The culture of it. Right.
You shot up to get on the field. You talk about how football has changed. And,
right. It's a lot like Bud Selig with steroids. I mean, everybody knew steroids being the enabler when everybody and their mother knew what was happening.
Exactly. I mean, there were books written about the dangers of football in the early 1900s about head injuries. Mm-hmm. So it's not like doctors weren't aware. Probably not good for you.
Right.
They were aware, but nobody cared, and to a large degree, nobody cares today, to be honest. There's just a lot more hypocrisy about it, trying to hide it due to pending litigation. There's no altruistic motive. That's the only reason. But in a lot of ways, I think if you're the NFL commissioner, as long as Paul Tagliabue was, you could say the same thing about Pete Rozelle and Roger Goodell, you almost have to go in the Hall of Fame because of your impact on the game. I don't even – it doesn't mean that much to me when you're the commissioner. I mean, you have such a large influence on the game, and if you're talking about any Hall of Fame, it's basically the history of the game. You're trying to honor the history of the game. And if you're the NFL commissioner for a long time, you're going to have a big impact on the game. Might be good, might be bad, might be indifferent, but you're going to have a big impact. So those guys, they should all be in, but I don't know how much it really means. Once you get that position, it's almost like a guarantee you should be in.
Speaking of Tagliabue and that era, we got Luke Kuechly announcing his retirement at 28 years old. I mean, we were talking about right before he came on, John. I was a little surprised that night when he was crying on the field. I mean, you felt at that point he was done. He came back and played. I think he came back that same year and weeks later. But are we going to start seeing more and more of this? Do you think this is going to be more the norm? I'm getting my 6, 7, 8 years, and I'm getting the heck out of this game.
Well, I think teams should be more aware of it. I know Adam Schefter just tweeted out the numbers. The numbers haven't changed drastically as far as career spans and how long people play, so it tends to even out. But there's been some high-profile guys. And it really goes back to Chris Borland, if you remember him. He had a great rookie year in San Francisco, and he looked like he was going to be a star linebacker for years and years and years and just quit. And everyone said at that time, is this going to be the new norm? It wasn't. But there are certain guys, walking away. That's a superstar player. Luke Kuechly is the best linebacker of this generation, the best. And I don't think anybody's particularly close. So anytime you see somebody at that level walking away early, you do realize you're in a different era, no question about that. And teams need to be aware of that. Because it used to be age and injuries. Now you could put in sort of education. And there are going to be certain guys who walk away. And this is always the most fluid sport of the professional sports because so many things can happen. And this is just added to the mix.
Yeah, it was. I guess it was a shocking story, but when you take a step back, you're like, you know what? I'm not as shocked at knowing his background and his career. Luke Kuechly is retirement, 28 years old. Johnny Mac's with us, Football at 4. Before we let you run here, John, putting your ear to the asphalt here, do you hear anything about those coaching openings?
No, and that stuff usually leaks out. So a couple theories, Senior Bowl practice, that's sort of like the convention of out-of-work coaches. So they might be waiting for that. To talk to some people. And then you look at the teams left in the playoffs, and maybe they have interest on somebody there, and you start to see who's in line. They've already kind of said if Eric Bieniemy gets a head coaching job, which he's not going to get, then Mike Kafka, who was here, would be next to be that Andy Reid offensive coordinator in waiting to be a head coach. That could be a guy the Eagles are interested in to give a promotion to make the offensive coordinator. But, yeah, it's kind of surprising how little they've made waves. Jim Caldwell is a name who everyone speculated on early. It seems like he might not be interested in taking that kind of job where you're an offensive coordinator that doesn't call plays. And I mention that because he's got such a big resume as a two-time former head coach and offensive coordinator who has called plays to great success. This might not be the best spot for him. So I think things will start to clear up once Senior Bowl week starts.
All right, Johnny Mac, Football 4.
Do you see any scenario where Press Taylor gets that? I saw a report today, John, that someone.
I mean, I think they have to have back sort of plan B, plan C if you don't get what you want.
Now, would Press Taylor get it ahead of Deuce Staley?
Yeah, I do. I think he will.
Wow. Well, then if your theory is that those two coaches got fired because Jeffrey Lurie was, reticent about the public backlash and felt they needed change, then the move is not putting Press Taylor at OC. That's not going to quell public backlash at all. It's only going to reignite it.
But I will also say it's not only my theory. But we'll also say that, as I just said, I don't think Press Taylor's getting this offensive coordinator job as plan A. Mm-hmm. I think that would be something you would have to visit. Who knows? Maybe they reached out to Jim Caldwell.
Right.
And if he says no, maybe they want Mike Kafka. And if he says no and he wants to stay with Andy Reid, well, then you start a pecking order, and Carson loves Press Taylor and vice versa. That would be plan C, maybe even plan D, whatever. But I think
Juan
from that
Castillo's not
standpoint-
available.
Yes, no, yeah, he got hired by somebody.
Yeah, he got hired by the Bears, offensive line coach. It feels like that, though. If Press gets it, not as extreme as Juan going from offensive line to defensive coordinator. Well, we got to fill it with somebody, and this guy, wants the job.
Remember, I mean, Doug Peterson was Plan C, or some will say Plan D, and that worked out. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't always necessarily. It's not going to be a good decision. But I do think if you look at history and you look at Doug's history, he wants somebody involved with the quarterback position to be the coordinator. And it doesn't mean you have to play quarterback. You have to be a quarterback, but you have coached the position. You've had to be around the position. You have to have some experience with the position. And that's where I think Deuce Staley has an issue, at least from this organization's standpoint.
Now, if they went down this list of guys and everyone said, no, I'm staying where I'm at, and DeFilippo, I'm interested, I will come back, would they say not interested? Or after going through 3-4, yes, we'd be interested?
Well, I think they should be interested. I think it's tough to tell. I go back to when John got fired in Minnesota, and Doug was really terse about not wanting him back in the organization, to the point where it was noticeable. Not like we're in season, not like I'm going to continue what's going on, we'll revisit it down the line. He was like, no, we're not interested in that. So I don't know. But, relationships can be repaired as well, just because maybe the things didn't end on the best note doesn't mean you can't repair a relationship down the road. I think the Eagles should investigate that, because I think he's a good coach, and maybe he's learned a little bit from those failed situations, and maybe he's willing to cut an ego, and I would certainly not deem it out of the question.
Yeah, I actually have the transcript from that day you're speaking of, and he was asked by someone, former Eagles quarterback coach John DeFilippo is now available. Is he somebody you'd consider bringing back here? Doug Peterson, I was anticipating this question. Job for me. He helped us win a world championship, and then he had an opportunity. I love my coaches. I'm confident in the guys we have. At this time, no.
And that's a no.
So that was on.
Up so quickly. I'm even more impressed I remit. Oh,
yes.
Tough.
I can multitask pretty good at this thing. 3 ESPN. He's Johnny Mac at JF McMullen. Follow it for We Do It. He'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thank you, guys.